I'm going to turn the session over to you, Lonnie Feemster.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. I want to clarify a couple of things. I appreciate the invitation, and it was very interesting because I went back and looked at all our emails to try and get everything organized. And I see you asked me in February, and one thing or another, we end up in June doing this presentation. Now, at the time, I was also babysitting my granddaughter. So I'm going to close the door because my other job as babysitter is she stayed with us for a year and a half, and she's very precocious. She loves her grandpa, and she's liable to bust in the room at any time. But we've got a couple of people watching her. They just came in last night to spend a little time. My daughter's having another baby. She's in New York. But that's one thing we didn't have in the intro. My wife, Dr. Deborah Feemster, who is distinguished in her own right, and my guide in education and scholarly research. I thought I was a great researcher and a scholar after I read Malcolm X's book when I was working at the utility company. And when I read his autobiography, I was very impressed with how he came from where he started. When he picked up, and he was discouraged from becoming a lawyer by his favorite teacher, a history teacher, who told him it's not reasonable for the N-word to aspire to be an attorney. Well, this caused him to go down a bad road, and he ended up being a gangster and a burglar and ended up in prison. And he turned to religion and spirituality. And because there was very little knowledge in prison, he copied the dictionary word for word, which gave him a mastery of the English language. And he was known, and I believe he was probably a genius to begin with, but he didn't know his own value. And being an African-American in a bad environment in America, he went down the wrong path. And there was some point in his life autobiography, he talked about almost shooting someone over he was playing the numbers in New York. And at the time I was carrying around a 45. Sometimes I'd keep it in the car, but a friend of mine had let me keep his gun for him. And I thought it gave me power. When I read Malcolm X's story and saw what he went through, and when he adopted spirituality, he started down a path that led him to be one of the most recognized speakers in the country for the rights of African Americans and the inequities in our system, in our society. So I made a plan then. I hadn't picked up a book since high school. I went to the Washoe County Library and said, I'm going to read every book on the 4th floor. And it took me a couple of years before I realized you're not going to read every book on the 4th floor. And you skip religion anyway, because they told me don't get involved with religion and politics. So I started on the second shelf of the Washoe County Library. And that led me to become a scholar, but nothing compared to when my wife really was working on a PhD. And she served for many years with the school district on the school board, but I saw what scholarly research can do for you. And so all this led me to the fact that now I've got 3 libraries in my house. I've got thousands of my own books. I read a lot of them. I'm rereading some, but they're a part of what I learned. In addition to my mother, who got me in the NAACP, and Mary Stewart White, who got her into the NAACP, but they kept losing my membership, and I decided, okay, I better get a life membership because this problem is not going to be cured in my lifetime, and it hasn't been. So that led me to a long history of study And there were some very important people in that period. But I tried to study the Unitarian Universalist 7 principles. And I looked at it, and I've done a lot of presentations. So I made one on civil rights, and it starts out, and this is what the slideshow is about, but it doesn't, the point is it starts and it addresses the work of the NAACP and I've got an image of the 16th Street Baptist Church. I started out with the 4 little girls that were firebombed in Birmingham by the Ku Klux Klan. And the slide, it's just a picture of the 16th Street Baptist Church. You know, what I want people to, I ask people when I do the slideshow, do you know what this means? There's no words on it, but 16th Street Baptist Church and a picture of the little girls. And I mean, it's so heart-wrenching. It's hard for me to keep that slide on. In fact, I'm changing it on my computer because it is heart-wrenching. And the next one, and the reason is we're talking about children being slaughtered in our community by people with weapons of war. And to see and hear the images from the January 6th insurrection, to see where we are now after all this time, I did not think we would be back here where we see little kids being slaughtered, and people being murdered with weapons of war by people that have mental illness. And I do think people that go out and slaughter innocent people are mentally ill. All people who go shoot defenseless people and children are mentally ill. I can't define that. I'm not a psychologist. I'm more of a humanitarian, you might say. I can't see that you couldn't be mentally ill. And yet our country still sends people of war to kill other people with bullets. A very ancient technology of throwing pieces of metal at buildings and other people. And so that's what moved me about the Unitarian principles. When I looked at them, I said, I don't have a problem with any of these. This is great. I didn't understand the church in your work. But as I moved down my slides in this one of many civil rights presentations, this one was called Black Votes Matters. I did it for the Washoe County Democratic Women, the Negro Business and Professional Women, and a couple of other groups, and made my wife look at it a couple of times. She's a great advisor. But the other next picture was Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner, 3 young men who were murdered in effort to go and help organize voters in the South. They murdered them and buried their bodies in a shallow grave. But interesting thing, even murderers, it just bothers me to think that they killed the 2 young men, the black man who was with them, the young black man, I don't think they were old enough to vote, was tortured also. The next slide I have in my presentation, I tried to put these in chronological order, was about Medgar Evers, who was shot down in his driveway, his family's home. And his wife and children were there. I knew Merle Evers. I talked to her. I was involved with NAACP at that time. I was beginning to get really involved, taking on different chairmanships of different committees. And of course, my mother's right there with me. I think I was always trying to fill her shoes. I mean, she was a great humanitarian, received many awards in Northern Nevada. She was born and raised here. She was a Catholic. My wife went to Catholic school. I tell people I'm Catholic, but the whole point is I'm not sure my mother knows who got baptized and who didn't. But I just, I'm very involved, and I often tell people, God knows what's in my heart. So he's not concerned, God is not concerned with what building I go to do good work, but it should be God's work. But there's something else that really moved me. The next slide was about a man named Jimmy Lee Jackson, a young man, elder in the church, a deacon in the church, an elder, I think he was a deacon, but he was murdered protecting his mother as they were marching. They were involved in Get Out the Vote in Marion, Alabama, or no, Marion, I think it was Marion, it right by Selma. Yeah, because what happened was they community wanted to take his body. He was murdered for no particular reason other than trying to protect his mother, who was protecting his 82-year-old grandmother after they were chased into a store or little restaurant. And the officer finally was convicted of the murder in 2007. It's like amazing. But I did the presentation, and there was another Reverend James Reeby and Viola Greg Luzo, Unitarians. And so I put their pictures in and I read their stories, and it was very moving. They were Unitarians, but I guess originally they were Presbyterians. Now, I wanted people to understand certain things that happened that brought us to this point. They had gone to help in Selma, partially because Dr. King has written what's called Letter from the Birmingham Jail when he was chastised. And I thought this was all appropriate because I was asked to do this because you had done a number of talks about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I've got his book that I've used, the autobiography of Martin Luther King, autographed by Claiborne Carson. I met him about 12 years ago at the university, and I've bookmarked all of King's great speeches, particularly the one that I think is the most moving, and that's Been to the Mountaintop, less than 24 hours before he was assassinated. I bring this up because this has been my guide for leadership and civil rights, along with Malcolm X, who regretted some of the things he said. I've read Malcolm X's autobiography 3 times. Every 10 years I read it. I think he was one of the most important figures in American history in the 1900s, particularly civil rights, because of how far he moved himself by study and integrity. And Dr. King, when I was reading his book, I got a call from a police officer. I had 3 young children at the time. And he said, he was involved with the NAACP, and he was on our executive committee. And he said, we've been getting some chatter about from the white supremacy groups, and just be careful where you go and where you're around. I normally work in my office in a window on a major highway, and all you gotta do is drive down the highway. You don't have to slow down, and you can shoot through my office. And I remember thinking, well, it's Christmas. I'm doing the Christmas shopping. I really don't want to get shot right now. It really would put a damper on things. And I really appreciated that. And it shows the importance, because I have no way to have access to that kind of information, but I know it's being monitored. The concern I had was Malcolm X had been assassinated, Dr. King had been assassinated, and Reverend James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo had been assassinated, and they had little children. They had children. I don't know exactly how young her two children were, but they gave their lives just like the rest of them. So the current concerns I have is I had a situation once where I had to have some young Black men arrested who were shooting up the neighborhood and dealing drugs and bringing prostitutes into Northeast Reno. And they got out of their car, they took a shotgun, shot up, and they, I guess, announced to the neighbors that they were there. And I was preparing the weed field lot for some churches that were doing a event in Pat Baker Park. And I said, you can park on my lot, but I'm out with a weed hoe early in the morning, maybe 8:30. And this guy gets out and shoots up in the air with a shotgun. And then they go over by the dumpster, and I'm across the street. I'm slowly reaching for my cell phone as I'm hoeing with one hand. I walk by and I call the police, and I said, there's some guys out here shooting a shotgun up in the air. There's an old lady walking across the field. I don't know what could happen, but there was a murder had been committed a half a block away. I knew the circumstances. I had chastised the city manager. I'd followed him around the meetings, and I said, you've got to do something about Northeast Reno. The police officers are not patrolling. They're avoiding the area. The drug dealers had moved in. They had brought in prostitutes. And I remember in deciding, okay, you got to call the cops because it doesn't matter what happens. You got to die for something. And so I was very moved by the Unitarians, and that's really, this all came together because Dr. Murphy asked me to do a talk and it was during a presentation you had by others on Dr. King. And as much as I've used his teachings, his life, and the trials and tribulations that he went through, I thought this is very appropriate. And when I put my slides together and saw the Unitarians that had given their lives for the cause that I support. So my experience with civil rights, and I think I got my notes right. I want to make sure I don't get this too confused, was to ask for my feelings on racial justice and what we can do in our community. Had a young lady, we had a real troublesome year. I've served not 6 terms as president of the NAACP, but 5 terms. I'm thinking about running one more time, but I don't know. It was very hard. The last 2 years where I came back in, I was asked to come in on several occasions to help get the branch up, running and active. It's all volunteer organization. There are no paid employees. We had a Jewish president, Jeff Blank, one time, and one of the neighbors said, well, I bet they're paying him more than they paid you because he's a white man. Well, I don't consider him particularly a white man, and I'm going to mention that in a minute, but nobody gets paid in the NAACP that works on a branch level and is out in the field. Medgar Evers wasn't getting paid, and all of the people that have lost their lives in the past haven't been paid to do what they're doing, and most of them spent a lot of money to do what they had to do, including giving their lives. So I was very happy that you gave me the honor to help serve your church. have been studying something. I have a little bit of a problem I want to share with you. The young girl wrote me a letter, and it was very moving. I'm not the president of the branch right now, but we have an election in November, and a couple of things that have happened made me consider maybe I'm not done yet. I need to get some of these young people, though, to come in. They've got a lot more energy than I do. They were out in the streets, they were riled up. There were more non-minorities supporting the reform, our policing, and justice for George Floyd after his murder. And to see that moved me. And this young lady said, what can we do? A lot of young people were involved, and she sent me an email. She probably called the branch, got my email number. I've got, I'm a real estate broker, and I have cards all over the places. Everything's public with me, including my address. It's not hard to find me, but she said, what can I do as a student? And I wrote her back and I said, well, one, you can get involved with people that aren't maybe from your neighborhood, people you don't see all the time. And that's what the Unitarians did. They weren't, well, Miss Uzo, she did live in a low income area. She wanted to be by the people. She was an NAACP member. And I told the young lady, get involved with people, learn about other cultures, and try and encourage. I said, what you're doing is what's important. And that's what I was so moved by, the Unitarian concepts and principles and behavior in the past in the civil rights movement. After Dr. King made an issue with letter from Birmingham jail about the pastors who were, the religious leaders who were chastising him for trying to move too fast. I mean, after hundreds and hundreds of years of enslavement and racial bias and murder and mayhem in the Africans that were kidnapped and brought to America to serve as slaves, I continued to try and learn more and more. I've had a number of people, and this kind of bothered me, and I want to bring this up. I think we're getting about the point where we need to go to questions and answers, but I had a friend of mine, a Jewish person. Some of my family is Jewish, Pacific Islanders, Native American, white. Well, okay, that brings up the issue, white. People say, I don't understand. Well, his friend told me, I'm not white, I'm Jewish. Well, I don't know, because I didn't know what Jewish meant when I heard that there were some people, white people didn't like other white people, but then I'm totally at a loss, because I started reading another book, I've got thousands of books, but this one I've been reading the last couple of years, The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. It's a fascinating story of where the term Caucasian, how they developed white superiority, why it was white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It was Saxons and Celtics, and the Irish, they didn't know what to do. They said their heads weren't shaped right. But it's fascinating at this point in my life that this is one of the most important books I've studied recently, The History of White People, because it explains how this mess got into such a mess in our country. Du Bois, I think, said, or someone, this is going to be the problem of this century. Well, so apparently the problem of the next century also. But The History of White People is very enlightening, because if you don't understand how we got where we are, you're probably not going to be able to figure out how we get to where we need to be. And we're raising generation after generation of children. And I've had people tell me, well, I don't quite understand your issues because I'm white. Well, I've had some problems at the schools recently, a high school and a middle school. I can look out the window and see it. And I talked to the principals about it, and they said, well, the teacher said this and that, but they're white middle class, you know, from way out here, Elko, whatever, or they're from Montana. And I said, well, how do you know they're white? Did they have a card? How do you get in the white group when it was made up like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny? So I started reading this book and I realized, well, the reason we have this problem is because the people that where the word Caucasian comes from were treated so poorly, they were looked down upon by other Russians. And the Greeks and the Romans and Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan, they conquered the light-skinned Northerners. And they enslaved them and they raped the women. And so when they developed superior weapons, why is it odd to believe they wouldn't come up with a belief that they're superior because they had superior weapons? They were more barbaric. And so it all of a sudden started to make sense that the problem is we are educating our children so they don't understand that. In the Washoe County history book, I've met with their curriculum director. I've analyzed their books. They're rated poorly at 23% for teaching ethnicity and cultural groups. I don't see people as white and black. I can't find white in the Bible, nor can I find black. I find references that people distort from Christian Bibles. And the concern I have is we're raising a generation after generation of children in the ignorance of the various cultures in our society, in our country, and we expect them to be police officers and doctors and lawyers and lawmakers and judges. And how can they solve problems, excuse me, when we haven't taught them knowledge? I would ask any of you, if you have someone who wants to do brain surgery and you've got a tumor in your brain and you say, have you been to medical school? I say, no, I didn't feel, I don't like school, but I got a lot of sharp tools here. Just lay down and shut up. We're sending our children out to solve the problems of our country and the world, and they're poorly educated and easily pulled into hatred because ignorance leads to fear, which leads to hate, and you're just one step to violence. And that's why we saw all these people that helped the civil rights movement die, be murdered brutally. You remember the recent shooting at the school in Uvalde, Texas. The little girl smeared blood on her. She put her hand in another child's blood. When Miss Liuzzo was shot several times in the head, the Black man in the car she was giving a ride to was splattered with blood, and he played dead. Is that what we're going to teach our children in school? How to smear blood on their bodies and pretend like they're dead? So I think we're getting to the point where we have some questions. I did a 40-page resume and applied for a job for Senator Harry Reid one time. And I can tell you, I didn't get the job. So I can go on and on. There's a lot of amazing stories, and I want to stop. And this is one of the reasons I don't want to run the NAACP right now. I'd like to document a lot of things that have gone on that people don't know about. The horrible things I've seen in this community growing up, the racial bias and hate But I'm moved when I go out and I've told many people, I saw more white people or people that weren't people of color, if you want to call them people of color. I saw a lot of humans from various ethnic groups, because I'm trying to avoid the term white and black. See, I read another interesting book called A Man Called White. Walter White, he was president of NAACP. He was so light-skinned that he could sit in meetings of white racists in the South, if I can use the term white loosely, because I consider you all humans. And it shouldn't be too hard for any human to understand the problems of another human. And, he, what we call in the African-American ethnicity, light-skinned. I would be called light-skinned, but apparently what I find is African-Americans call me light-skinned, non-African-Americans call me dark-skinned. And so I was taken to the Native American reservation when I was in first grade. Why? Because I didn't want to go home with my sisters. And and the bus seemed like a fun place to go. So the Native people in Reservation Road hid me, and they played hide the little black kid from his parents. My mother and father became very good friends with many of the Native people because they took care of me, and I developed lifelong friendship from those that lived on Reservation Road. And because many Pakistanis, when I travel around the country, ask me if I'm from Pakistan, I apparently look Pakistani also. And because of the broadness of my family and the love for all children, I really feel that somehow this is all in my life for a reason. So I've gone, I think, a lot of time, and we should probably, if there's some questions, but I don't know if I've hit the specific mark of what you asked for, but I am thankful for the invitation to talk to you. I was very moved by my study of Unitarian members. I'm actually considering joining the Unitarian Church. It's been a great education, and that's why I continue to educate myself, because I've found out that the more I read, the less it matters that I've forgotten most of the stuff from high school.
Well, we would love to have you, Lonnie, and so please come join us. So yeah, this is a good time for questions, and I would invite anyone who has a question for Mr. Feemster to unmute yourself. And Bob, you have your hand up. Unmute yourself and tell us your question.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Feemster. It's a pleasure to have you. I've been concerned with my impression that the term racism has come to be equated with problems associated with Afro-Americans and people we call Black. And the fact is, of course, that other peoples, brown peoples, yellow peoples, Native American, suffer some of the exact same prejudices and injustices as Blacks do. And it seemed to me that when we equate racism with problems with Blacks, that we're really overlooking a lot of other people who might legitimately say, what about us? Would you respond to that, please?
I thank you very much for bringing that point up. I have been arguing this for 25 years at least. I tell people, stop calling everything racism. Number one, look the title up in at least 3 different dictionaries, Wikipedia, Britannica, whoever you've got, because you can't call everything racist and have any meaning to the word. the reason I don't like even to say I'm Black anymore is because that's my ethnicity. And I'm not the same as other Black people. And so everything that you don't like, if somebody says, and it has to do with bias, doesn't particularly mean it's racist. They may be just poorly educated. Maybe they went through the school systems. I used to think the Catholic school was this great place where you learned all about religion or whatever. I know more about the Christian Bible than my mother or my wife, and they both went to Catholic school. So this is the problem now, is getting to where if you use it for everything, it means nothing. And so now some of the young people who are coming up with their own language, now it's BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Okay, well, I think we've got to move to where we consider everyone as a human. And I'm a little concerned when people tell me they're white because, I have a card that says I've been vaccinated for COVID. I got a driver's license that says I can drive. But you don't just automatically get those things because you get a car. You have to have some proof. So how do you prove you're white? They put the light-skinned Caribbeans and mulattoes, which is a word I really hated when I ran that word. I said, wait a minute, there's too many names I've been called. I don't need any more names. But LGBTQI plus, and I've got a lot of friends that I've talked to. What does a Q mean? I get some of the strangest, and we never finish the conversation. And some people say, well, I'm Q, so I don't use that word because I considered it insulting. But apparently some people like that word or like to accept it, but I'm getting confused as to how many words do I use when I'm referring to somebody that has a different perspective on gender than my religious beliefs or my Bible. But this is the problem now, is not only are young people coming up with words like LOL, why can't you say laughing out loud? Why do you need to come up with something that sometimes you don't understand in case you missed it? Can you write that out? Are you running out of toner? So communication, and George Orwell mentioned about how politics, and all you got to do is listen to politics and how they play with language. And the effort is to confuse us and drive us mad. So I think we've got to better educate our children and understand that if you learn about African-American history, the ethnicity, all Black people aren't like me. They don't all look like me. They don't all have the same skin tone like me. I'm lighter than some people from parts of Italy, and I had a grandfather who was from Italy, but Greeks. I talked to a lady from India. She was at my house and she was showing me where she came from in northern India. On the map, I have maps of the walls in the universe because they often comes up, but she said, well, what's your ethnicity? And I have a family tree outside my office that has the last 200 or 300 family members on it, pictures of my grandparents, all four of them. So I think racism is an abused, misused, and confusing word. And I think we need to be clear. If someone doesn't understand what they're doing is offensive to someone else, you should seek to understand more about the person rather than to just blankly call them a racist. Everything is not racist. It may be stupid. It may be insensitive. But I thank you for that, because I think that's important that we recognize I try and avoid some of the big words and things I read in books, and I've read some great authors, except some of them you got to have a thesaurus and dictionary with you. So that's the best answer. I agree with you. It is causing some problems, and I don't know if BIPOC is the answer. I think we've got to move past that too. But yes, I recognize the problems that people have, because Italians weren't immediately let in. Remember, it was the Church of England versus the Catholics, France and Greek. And they went to war constantly. It was the Catholics against the Protestants. And you know, so I think that's where this mess started. And that's why I find this fascinating, the history of white people. How did they come up with that? What did, in the traits, the genius traits of the English, is something Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote about. He wasn't for slavery, but he caused a lot of people to accept white supremacy and white superiority as a belief, because he was so respected in America and around the world for his writings. I had no idea of his part in this, but he did not believe, he believed in inferiority of Native people and Africans who were working as slaves in America. But I'm just going to continue to keep learning, because I'm trying to avoid calling black people, but rather I'm African American. My ancestors came from one of 52 countries. Most of them are Nigerian. I've done several DNA tests. I know some, a little bit of Scotch Irish, about 12% Italian, and the rest of the Native American and Nigerian. Thank you.
Yeah, it seems that we have a problem with people who are just different from us, whatever our viewpoint is. So whether it's on gender or race or ethnicity or skin color or behavior or even political belief. So we need to learn how to embrace people who think differently, look differently, behave differently from ourselves, which is why that first Unitarian principle that you referred to, Lonnie, seems so important. That is, accepting the inherent worth and dignity of all persons. So, well, other questions?
Well, I don't, it's not really a question, but I have followed you, Mr. Feemster, for every time you're in the newspaper, I think, yay, and your mother. And I really hope that you will devote yourself to writing about yourself and your activities. And maybe you have, and maybe you're on that road, you kind of referred to it. But I mean, you're one of these people in the Reno Sparks, Washoe County area who's a treasure, a community treasure. And please write about yourself and what you have done and issues you have stood for all your life, and your mother before you. And I think it's really important. And so the other thing I want to say is I hope that the Washoe County Library has that book, The History of White People, because I want to get it. So that's it. That's my comment. Just thank you.
I thank you for your comments, and I would say that YouTube has some of Nell Painter's videos. She's still around, one of the principal, and talking with some problems that they had with people that did not have a good understanding of ethnicity. They didn't understand, and they had made a comment, a Black woman had told some kids to sit down in the lunchroom, and they said they didn't think a Black woman should be reprimanding the children. Now, considering the fact that she was a nutrition services worker, that was her job and responsibility to reprimand the children as they were standing up, walking around instead of eating the food sitting down. But the answer was, well, my teacher from Montana, she's not around. Well, the point is, we've got to end that, and we maybe need to require all teachers, in order to get your certification, have to study critical race theory, because you can't teach what you don't know. And if they were raised in a society where they basically hung out with people like them in their neighborhood that looked like them and they thought were from the same club of white, whatever that club is, I don't even know. I got a ticket, 3 tickets by the police. One gave me a ticket And 4 years later, I got another ticket there. 4 years later, I got another ticket. I don't get a lot of tickets once every 4 years. It's all 10 miles over the speed limit. No, I got the ticket, put it down, Latino. I don't sound Latino, but whatever. The next one, black. The next one, I didn't get a ticket, but it was a bad infraction of the rules. The police had a traffic stop. I'm driving and my son's in the car, so I'm extremely cautious. I'm pull up to the light. I'm watching the cops stopping people at this mirror and that mirror. And I go through the light and the officer gets on a motorcycle. He comes behind me. My son said, "Dad, you're gonna get a ticket. That's a motorcycle cop." The guy said, "Do you know why I stopped you?" And I started to say, racial profiling. Because I had been with the police and those first two tickets, we went to many cities in California to look at the racial profiling data collection. But the guy was smiling. So I said, "No, don't say that." And he looked at the license, whatever. He came over, he said, "Did you see that school bus on the other side of the street? The kids getting off? This ain't 10 miles over the speed limit. This is a serious violation." I drove right past the big stop sign because I got cops in both mirrors, 3 mirrors I'm watching. He wrote out a warning. I get home. I was so happy. Had a glass of wine. I'm sitting up reading it, looking at the ticket. It said, it was a warning. But it said race, white. I said, "Ooh, I got passed." Just like down in New Orleans, they sometimes have to pass to go across town. And it's hanging on the wall in my other office because it is part of the story. I have a picture of who is it? Well, the point is, yeah, we are humans and we need to understand humans and ethnicities. And I've asked people who brought up and said, "I'm white." I said, "Well, what country did your ancestors come from?" And, "Oh, Britain and German, whatever." But why is this white group? They're not the majority in this country, but they encompass so many people. And I can't find white. It's the only white place I find on the map is Antarctica. I don't think that means everybody came from Antarctica, but they are a lot of white and black animals up there, maybe. So that's kind of my concern, is that we're not teaching humanities in our school adequately. And it's so important that teachers understand history, ethnicity, and that our children come out of there prepared to be doctors and lawyers, regardless of what their ethnic background is. And it's hard. And I've had many arguments with young blacks who say, "Oh no, whites are this and blacks." I said, there is no place called black. There's no place called white. This is all like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. Sooner or later, you have to tell children they're not there. There is no Santa Claus. There is no Easter Bunny.
Kevin? Two things. One, to follow up on Mary Lee. I think it would be a wonderful idea for you to do some writing, Mr. Feemster, but also perhaps oral history at the university. I would think that if you haven't done that, they'd be interested. Also, there's some comments from Leah. She would like a copy of your reading list.
I think that's 1,000 books long, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hundreds and hundreds of books, and I used to check them out to people, make them leave a $20 bill, and that way my books always came back. But I've recently been giving them away because I know I'm not going to read them all again. I can only maintain, and there's so much knowledge. I just read Sapiens, a book by a writer, outstanding book that kind of pulled together history. I'm studying paleoanthropology and the history of humans, a book called The Study of Humanity, God, by a Persian, no, he wasn't Persian, he's Sufi Muslim, but the point, it explains that how we went around the world and formed tribes and beliefs and perceptions of spirituality. The strange thing is what it made me realize that people 100,000 years ago went to sleep every night and they saw people that they knew that had died and passed on. And they knew there was something more than just the things we hold and can touch, that there was some place other than here, and that people, they knew their memories were there and they could create this world. And I don't understand that. I've never died. At least I don't know if I've died. Some of the religious trainings I've had says, yeah, you've died before and you're probably gonna die again until you get it right. So yeah, I'd love it. I did want to mention, I did mention Nell Painter has got some great videos on YouTube. But The History of White People, I think, is one of the most meaningful books. I'm reading it very slowly. I'm not reading it speed read like I normally read, because it is so important. When you talk to people, if they don't consider you have knowledge to back your words, you're wasting their time and you're wasting your time. And I am going to be writing. It's just that I'm trying to figure out, am I going to die real soon, or do I have a couple of years left? But I've got to document a lot of this because I have information on things that people don't know about. I've worked with a lot of attorneys. I've got a lot of people, law enforcement agencies sued in Northern Nevada. I work with Julian Bond on Get Out the Vote programs that he created when he retired as the chairman of the board for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He formed a group called the NAACP National Voter Fund, and I ran the programs in Nevada and Las Vegas and Reno, mainly Las Vegas because they were targeting African-American electorate. And so we sued the state of Nevada based on my work, and they got an extra 20,000 people got registered that were low income, that were registered at health and human services outlets around the state. That next year after the lawsuit, they tried to kick it out of the state and dismiss the case. And I think it was 9th District sent it back and said, yeah, you need to review this and get another judge. So that next year after they settled out of court, it was the state of Nevada. We had 22,000 new low-income people registered to vote. I registered about a help register. I've never done anything by myself. It's always all the people that held up the NAACP organization and that really have done the work. I take a lot of the credit because I get on television and get to speak, but that's not really where the work is done. It's the people in the association that do the small bits and pieces and support the group. So I will be working on getting this documented because I realized recently how much I had that people will not know about. And I read several histories of civil rights in Nevada last year, but it was so much activity. I was glad they came up with Zoom in these ways that we could communicate and not have to actually drive across town and spend hours going here and there. So I'm sorry, I digress.
Well, let me ask you one last question, and that is, what do you think is the most important justice issue in our own community?
The most important, when I'm not president of the NAACP, I'm chair of the education committee. I'm impassioned because of what I learned from Malcolm X and what I learned from King and what I learned from a man called Dr. Elmer Rusko, who wrote Good Times Coming, Black Nevadans in the 19th century. I've got his autograph book. He was a good friend. He taught me how to do research, and I found a colored school in Nevada that was created in the 1870s. Education is so important. My concern is we are turning out generation after generation of ignorant children that are being pulled into hate because they have not been educated about the various ethnic cultures. And then we have young African Americans who don't understand their own history and don't understand that a lot of what you fear, a lot of what you reject is made up baloney. And we've got to change our education system. When I went to the Southern Poverty Law Center and researching because of some incidents at Damani Ranch School, and I called the superintendent and I met with the curriculum director, and I said, I want all the history books. And one of the history books I've used when I used to lecture at high schools, it says, all people came from Africa. How long did you spend on that? Do you know the ramifications of understanding that people migrated? The last slide in my slideshow is out of National Geographic. It shows how people migrated down to Australia when the ice melt was frozen and the land bridges, and it was easier. And some of them went down there and took enough people. They got isolated as water melted, but they then the next group went up to Asia and then up to Europe. Then they went over the top of the world about 20, 30,000 years ago. I think about 30,000 years ago, from the best I can find right now. I've got to spend a lot of time studying anthropology, paleoanthropology, because a lot of this just explains we're all humans. And we can't keep raising generation after generation of children in ignorance and expect them to solve the problems anymore. You can expect someone who didn't go to medical school to do brain surgery. They don't know how. They're not connected. They're not getting humanities. And that's why I was so moved by your organization and your history and the people that have been in the civil rights movement and the sacrifice, and bringing Tim Weiss in. That was one of the wisest people I ran into. I saw him at the church, and I think that's what is the most important thing, that we improve our education system. And we can't have principals telling me that, oh, the teacher said something very stupid about Black people because she's from Montana or Idaho or Elko. This is madness. I know the teachers, the principals, they were much more knowledgeable. But we have got to, I think, stop this at the core of the problem: poorly educated children and ethnicity and understanding about race. We do have to talk about it. And we need to talk about LGBTQ plus issues, and issues that in the Bible and in some Bibles. I mean, I haven't read everybody's Bible. I've studied a lot of different religions, but I know that there are people that have a different opinion of sexuality than some of the religious dogmas. But they're still humans. And even the Pope, our great leader in the Catholic Church, which a lot of us don't follow all the rules. So thank you. I think somebody else got the hand raised.
Yeah, Bob Quillich wants to add one more question here.
Not a question. I'm a fan of Howard Zinn, the historian, who taught for, I think, about 20 years at the Afro-American College in Atlanta. And in one of his commencement addresses, he said something I've never heard anybody else say. He said, the reason we study history is to learn the mistakes we made before and to correct them today to make a better country tomorrow. That's why we study history. And I thought, wow, what a nice attitude about studying history. I just wanted to bring that in.
Yeah, I think I ran across his name recently. I was just listening to Book TV. I listen to C-SPAN a lot on Sundays. I have a lot of programs. They come on, great speakers and authors, and they had one on history teachers and presidential libraries and the importance of history and how we've fallen down, and put history way back at the end of the list of important things. But as you said, and others have said, if you fail to understand and know history, you can repeat it. And I think I added its mistakes. See, history is good. You can repeat the good stuff, but don't repeat the bad stuff. We don't need to take away rights and to re-enslave the former Africans, slaves, descendants. No, I don't want to go back. But as I said, I'm very, very saddened. I guess I'm becoming more of a humanitarian through my studies and beliefs. I just have to get a better grasp on how do I get this implemented. But I'm trying to tutor now young people because I think they have the potential and they're riled up, but they got confused and they didn't understand the complicated political world we have in America. You have to understand democracy as it works in this country. And I've had a lot of experience talking to people. One of the most enjoyable things I've ever done is to register voters and to watch people squirm and try and get out of registering until they finally pop up and say, well, I got a felony. And then we fixed that thanks to Jason Frierson and some other legislators. But that's the thing, we have to change the rules. We've got to change the rule makers, but we've got to educate them first. And that's why I think that's such an important comment you made.
Well, much of what you've had to say to us this morning reminds me of something else that W.B. Du Bois said, namely that education and hard work are the levers that raise a people up. And so obviously you've emphasized that again, and we really appreciate the honor of your sharing this hour with us this morning. Mr. Feemster, we are gratified and appreciate you and your work very, very much. So let me say this is our last Sunday forum for the season. We'll begin again in September, and in July, we will have a brainstorm to lay out the topics and speakers for the coming year. So watch your emails for the announcement of the brainstorm. It'll be sometime in July. So again, Mr. Feemster, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for your generous offer. I learned a lot in pulling things together, and that's why I enjoy this. It was a great eye opener for me, and I appreciate the fellowship, and I wish you all well. I think you're doing a fantastic job. I'm aware of a lot of what goes on. I don't move around as much as I used to, thanks to Zoom and Microsoft Teams and a couple other technology. But the NAACP had to shift the entire organization and very rapidly to an online presence. And we have a technology gap in our children. So we haven't really mastered the skills of using the technology we've been forced into because of the health crisis. And one thing that I remember King said, one of the worst offenses in our country is injustice in the health area. And we could see that happen in the last couple of years, that there's been great inequity. So we have a lot of work to do, and so do the Unitarians. So thank you all for having me.
Very good. And thank you again for reminding us of our Unitarian Universalist roots. And if you would like to consider joining the congregation, we would welcome you with open arms.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. So with that, I will extinguish the flaming chalice here, but not the light that Mr. Feemster has brought us today.